Occupational Therapists as Approved Clinicians, Do You Know Enough? I'm Genevieve Smythe. I'm an occupational therapist and professional advisor who works at RCOT, and we're really excited to be offering you this event about becoming an approved clinician. So in terms of the outline of the event, we're hoping that this will inspire and inform occupational therapists who are working in mental health or learning disability services to think more about becoming an approved clinician. In addition to clinicians, this session is also for our system partners, so workforce planners, educators and strategic leads who can think more about how do we create the right system around our clinicians to enable them to move into this really important role. Obviously, I'm sure you're aware, but the approved clinician role has a statutory function under the Mental Health Act in England and Wales. And if you haven't seen it, the team who I'm going to introduce you to did a great job of writing an introductory article about occupational therapists as approved clinician in November's OT News last year. So do have a look at it. In terms of the aims of the event, as I said, we want to really help people's understanding and interest in the role. We also want to think in a little bit more detail about what is it that occupational therapists specifically bring to the approved clinician role. We hope to provide some clarity for you, not only about what the role is, but the process. So if you're interested in this role, how do you become an approved clinician? And it is an ambitious piece of work, and you will find out much more about the competencies, about the portfolio you need to collect, about the role of the approvals panels. And I'm really delighted that we have some people here from our approvals panels to give us their wisdom and perspective. And you'll hear a little bit more about the competencies that are the core, in a way, of that role, that cover things like assessment, care planning, and equality and diversity. In addition to that detailed information about the clinicians and the journey you may be wanting to go on in the future, we're also going to be talking a bit more about how can our occupational therapy educators and leaders help the system, help prepare the system to provide those opportunities for occupational therapists stepping into the role. In addition to this webinar, the team have also been working really hard behind the scenes to provide a brilliant set of information and guidance for you, a hub of information about occupational therapists becoming approved clinicians, and that will soon go live on the RCOT website. And we've also been having ongoing discussion about how do we provide a place for peer support. That's one of the big learning points for me going on this journey and working with the team, the importance of occupational therapists coming together and supporting each other through the process. All of this work has been really driven by Awale, who I'm going to let her introduce herself in a minute, Awale O'Day. None of this would have happened without her, so she's an absolute genius. I'm really grateful to her and to our reference group. So Awale, would you like to say hello, introduce yourself?
Yes, hello everybody. It's so good to see so many people joining in. My name is Awale O'Day and I'm an independent occupational therapist, and I've been the topic expert that Jen reached out to help to collect the resources for this project. So it's a pleasure that we've got this far. It's been a lot of hard work since about June last year. And I really hope that you all enjoy the presentation and find it really useful. So please, I'd like to encourage you to ask any questions that you have. Thank you. Thanks, Jen.
Thanks so much. That was great. And onto the reference group. Now, I can assure you most of our meetings were not like this. It looks like we're all huddled on a rock staring into the approved clinician distance. But anyway, it's a picture that I enjoyed. So many thanks to Donve, to Tony, to Harriet, to both of the Sarahs, to Lucy, to Jasmine and Heather. So on to the plan then for the next 2 hours. We're going to hear from Donve and Harriet and Sarah, first of all, who are going to share their experiences about becoming an approved clinician. We're then going to move on to listening to our approvals panels. We have the North East of England approvals panel here, and also the All Wales approval panel, who will share their perspectives and wisdom on that important part of the process. We will have a brief break, and then after the break, we will be reflecting on how can educators, our occupational therapy educators and leaders help prepare the system to support our clinicians into the role. We'll be doing a breakout room exercise and a SWOT analysis where you'll get the chance to think, not only is the approved clinician role for me, if that's right for you, but if you're a system partner, how can you help prepare the system for our clinicians to move into this role? We're then going to have a Q&A panel discussion, and then we'll close the session at 2 o'clock. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to our first speakers. I'm going to let them introduce themselves. But Donve, Harry and Sarah, I'm delighted to have you here, and over to you.
Thanks very much, Jen, and welcome everybody. Really exciting to finally be at this event. I'll just introduce myself before handing over to Sarah and Harriet. So I'm Donve Thompson-Boy. I am a professional lead OT in Oxley's for community mental health, and I am an approved clinician currently working as a responsible clinician in the trust.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Sarah Nicholas. I'm a clinical specialist occupational therapist working in learning disability services for Dorset Healthcare. I'm a trainee approved clinician. I'm about 6 months into the training programme, and I'm really excited and pleased to be here this afternoon. Hope to share my experience with you all.
Hi, and my name's Harriet Heaton-Pike. I'm a senior occupational therapist working in adult inpatient acute mental health wards. And similar to Sarah, I'm also a trainee approved clinician. So yeah, here to talk about the journey so far. Have the next slide, please, Jen. So what the three of us are going to talk about today is we're just going to talk about an approved clinician, responsible clinician. What actually are the roles? The difference between an approved clinician and an advanced clinical practitioner, similar acronyms, so it's just kind of really having a discussion about separating those out. We thought we'd talk about the approved clinician training and approval process. We won't go into too much detail about that because we actually have the approval panels here today, so just cover that briefly. Then the three of us will talk about actually what motivated us to train as approved clinicians, the positives and challenges of that, both kind of as a trainee and then into the role, and any particular advice around, if you're interested in it, what we found beneficial to have as previous experience, and finally how we've been working with the Royal College of Occupational Therapists around this kind of new and exciting adventure. Thanks, Jen.
Right, so just a little bit of background. I'm sure some of you have heard various phrases banded around: approved clinician, responsible clinician, MPAC, non-medical AC, all kinds. So just firstly, to put things into context in terms of the Mental Health Act, hopefully most of you know about the Mental Health Act. So just to put into context, it obviously provides the legal framework in England and Wales. And that kind of underpins the practice of approved clinicians in terms of looking at compulsory assessment, treatment, and also thinking about the rights that service users have in terms of when they are detained under the Mental Health Act. So that's looking at things like, I suppose, advocacy, automatic referrals to tribunals and reviews and so on. And the Act also looks at kind of the detention criteria, which as approved clinicians, we'd be thinking about. So thinking about, mental disorder, thinking about the nature and degree of that mental disorder, nature being kind of the service user's history around their mental illness, the pattern, triggers and so on, and degree being the current mental state presentation. And obviously that needs to warrant, urgent treatment, usually in hospital, but it can also be in the community. And that's in the best interest of the service user, looking at their health and safety, but also the protection of others in the community. So just to put that kind of framework in place. So in 2007, the Mental Health Act was reviewed, and this is when they looked at introducing other mental health practitioners, and this is where social workers, psychologists, us as OTs and nurses, mental health and learning disability nurses we were considered a part of that group of additional mental health practitioners who could undergo training, thinking about the competencies that would be required as an approved clinician, and then obviously gain approval from the appropriate panel, which is obviously a Secretary of State's delegated responsibility. So that's when things really started becoming exciting for us as OTs. Next slide, please, Jen. So the idea around introducing these roles for additional mental health practitioners was really to look at, an enhanced patient experience, looking at the different skill set that different professionals could bring to service users' journeys. And that, I guess, is why the Act is very specifically says that a service user's responsible clinician needs to be the approved clinician who has the most appropriate skill set for the main treatment need of that service user. So, for me, working in predominantly inpatient rehabilitation, community rehab, for me, that was really exciting. It was really exciting to not just, look at the medical and medication side of things, but really that focus on enablement, rehabilitation, skills development, and so on. So the changes to the Act made that possible. So just to really clarify, something we haven't actually written down, but in terms of the difference between approved clinician and responsible clinician, because I think some people can find it a little bit confusing. So the approved clinician is the mental health practitioner that's been approved by the Secretary of State to undertake the role of responsible clinician. And that is specifically for the purposes of the statutory requirements of the Mental Health Act. So in order to become a service user's responsible clinician, some of you who've been around long enough might remember before the 2007 changes, we used to use the term responsible medical officer. So that then changed and became responsible clinician. So in order to become a service user's responsible clinician, you need to go through the approvals process and in essence be registered and be on that register as an approved clinician. Once you then become somebody's overall responsible clinician, you are then responsible and accountable in terms of having overall responsibility for the care and the treatment of that service user who is detained under the Mental Health Act. So I'm hoping that differentiates between the two. I think important just to point out that even myself as an OT working as a responsible clinician, obviously I can't prescribe, so I would be working alongside another approved clinician, another AC who's responsible for a particular part of the treatment, which in this case would be medication prescribing. But at the end of the day, I hold overall responsibility as the responsible clinician. So hopefully that helps differentiate between the two roles. Next slide, please, Jen. I'll hand over to Sarah.
So we felt that it might be helpful at this point to clarify the difference between approved clinician and not clarify the difference, but where they fit in terms of approved clinician and the advanced clinical practice framework, in case there's any kind of confusion around that. So the advanced clinical practice framework, Jen, can I have the next point, please? Sorry, I've gone too far, is obviously advanced practice and highly skilled practice in complex situations. So the practitioner has known and unknown areas of practice with autonomy within their scope of practice, and it covers 4 pillars of clinical practice. Whereas a consultant practice is expert practice across a broad spectrum, and it requires the practitioner to have full autonomy and overarching responsibility for the provision of care across the service or services. And it covers 5 areas of 5 pillars of practice. The consultant practice is still in development and under review, but for approved clinicians, the view is that it will require a consultant level of practice due to the decision making and responsibility required in order to have the authority as an RC. And what's important to say is that the advanced practice level is considered to be a master's level of practice, whereas approved clinicians is is considered to be equivalent to PhD level of practice. And there is further information on the links below. So in terms of the training, can I have the next slide, please? Thanks, Jen. So the training is very comprehensive and requires an application process to become an AC, which involves demonstrating a range of competencies across 8 areas in the format of a portfolio, which is supported at the Trust Directorate level and signed off by a regional panel. There's different regional panels across the country, and for us, it's for myself as a trainee in the South, it's Winterhead panel. And it requires the AC to demonstrate 8 competencies across a multi-professional AC framework. So the competencies required are a comprehensive understanding of the AC role, legal responsibilities and understanding of the AC and RC role, applied knowledge of legal and policy frameworks and codes of practice, assessment, treatment, clinical leadership and entity working, equality and diversity and communication. Can I have the next slide, please, Jen? Achievement of the 8 competencies demonstrated through a detailed comprehensive portfolio, which is then submitted to the panel authority for appraisal. The collection of evidence for the portfolio can take up to a couple of years, and it includes regular mentoring by the AC and shadowing. And it also requires the completion of a 2-day mandatory course. It needs to be supported both by local and board level in the undertaking of the portfolio and of the training. And it's also advised to complete a mental health law course, such as the PG Cert in mental health practice at University of Exeter. Thank you. Now I'm going to hand back over to Donve.
Thanks, Sarah. So I know I've touched very briefly on it, but just in terms of my experience, I've been working in mental health for 25 years, including during that time roles as professional lead. So when I started the process, I had about 20 years of experience, predominantly in inpatients and community rehab. So that was my skill sets. And I guess my love in terms of OT. And I think like a lot of us, at that time I was progressing in my career and feeling a little bit frustrated that in order to progress further up in terms of my career development, I'd really hit a ceiling in terms of my clinical opportunities. And to move up the banding, it really was much more operational management or a little bit of professional lead, but the clinical component of that role was really under a lot of pressure. And it was a few years prior to that the Mental Health Act had been reviewed, and obviously that created new clinical, patient-facing and leadership opportunities for OTs. So it was kind of bringing the two together. And at the time, we had a really good professional lead in Oxley's and Director of Therapies, who was very supportive of looking at multi-professional ACs across the trust and really took a lead strategically in driving this agenda forward. And so I took up the opportunity. It took me about 3 years in total. I think probably a little bit longer because I was the first OT. So it was difficult in terms of, having another OT to scrutinize my portfolio. And there was a little bit of, going backwards and forwards, but we got there in the end, a 3-year process. some really good mentoring, shadowing opportunities, and I was finally approved actually in OT week in 2017, which was good timing. And then since then, I've been working in the community, had a small caseload of service users on community treatment orders. So generally service users who've spent a period of time under Section 3 in inpatient setting. But then the feeling is that actually they still need that kind of framework of the Mental Health Act to support their recovery when they move into the community. So that's the caseload of service users I've been working with, and obviously also been involved in some of the strategic development around multi-professional approved clinicians. So I am part of the London Section 12 and approvals panel. And also looking at how we develop MPAC in the trust. In terms of my role as responsible clinician at the moment, that will involve, mental state examination. It will include, regular meeting with my service user, thinking about actually, do they still meet the criteria for detention at any point in time, or is it time to actually consider discharge from detention? So, I'm responsible for renewing someone's CTO. I can recall service users to hospital if I feel that there's a deterioration in mental state and that it would be in their best interest. And, if I was working in an inpatient setting, I can obviously be thinking about Section 17 leave and so on. So that just is a very quickly, in a nutshell, some of the kind of key roles and responsibilities that I undertake currently. And then towards the end of last year, I had to revalidate. So every 5 years, that's requirements in terms of CPD and evidencing that I've continued to practice and met the criteria in terms of the London panel. So that is my journey, and I think it's over to, is it Harriet? Sarah?
Thank you. Can I have the next point? Thank you. As I said in my introduction, I have been working in learning disability services now for 20 years as a clinical specialist, and I am a professional lead occupational therapist in LD services, learning disability services for Dorset Healthcare. And I've worked in a range of settings, both community, intensive support, crisis, and some inpatient work, specialist inpatient work in learning disability assessment and treatment unit. In my current team, which I've been in for about 12 years, most of the focus of our work, the kind of predominant focus of our work, is around preventing admissions into hospital for people with learning disabilities and mental health conditions or behaviours that challenge to sufficient risk to themselves or others that they may require a hospital admission. So a lot of work around preventing hospital admissions, a lot of crisis work and intensive work around that, but also lots of work for people that then do require a hospital admission, doing in-reach work into the hospital wards to expedite discharges, safe discharges out, and for people in specialist placements, work around monitoring and obviously again discharge planning and returning people back into community. So that's been a big focus of my work for the last 12 years within the current team that I work in. I'm also trained as a cognitive analytic therapist and in dialectical behavioural therapy in EMDR, and I have been using that in learning disability services, but for the last year, 1 day a week, I've been working for the intensive psychological therapy service in our trust. And that's been really useful and helpful because part of that role has actually been providing supervision in talking therapies for the medics that are there for part of their placement. So that's not only, I think, given me an opportunity to learn a lot about the doctor's education route, but also about kind of sharing skills and sharing practice and working in a very multidisciplinary way around providing different types of therapies to people with mental health conditions. I applied for the job, I think very similar to Donve and Harriet as well, that I wanted to remain clinical, and I had been in the same I suppose, level of clinical practice for many years now, 20 years, and I was really keen to continue to develop my skills and use my skills, but I didn't want to go into a management role. I really wanted to continue in kind of clinical leadership role and clinical specialist role. And so I was approached by the head of occupational therapy for our trust, who thought that this may be the AC trainee post, may be something that I would be interested in. And when I was reading about it, I thought, actually, this is something that I really feel would utilise my skills and develop me as a clinician. Another motivation for it was that I'm motivated to increase diversity and improve the delivery of person-centred care within the NHS, and that includes the redefining of traditional medical roles. And I guess some of the kind of fuel for that was the work I'd done at IPTAS, with working very closely with medics and sort of recognising what I could bring to the table. And I also feel that the AC role provides an opportunity to continue and use my experience and develop my skills to influence high quality mental health care, both at a direct and strategic level. So I was very motivated in order to be able to do that. And it's an exciting opportunity to be at the forefront of demonstrating the value of multidisciplinary roles at that strategic level. And I'm going to hand over to Harriet.
Thank you. So a little bit about my kind of journey to becoming an approved clinician trainee. My background is predominantly within forensic mental health work. I worked for around 8 years on a male low secure unit as the sole occupational therapist there. And while I was there, I also worked with the psychologist who has actually become an approved clinician. So that's kind of what made me aware of the journey quite early on in my career. After leaving Secure Services, I went into the Criminal Justice Liaison and Diversion Service. So that was working within Cornwall's custodies and in the community with individuals that had come into contact with the Criminal Justice Service. So like I said, mostly kind of forensic backgrounds there. When I was during my liaison and diversion kind of couple of years there, also had a secondment as the lead occupational therapist for inpatient mental health services for the county, which was a really exciting opportunity to kind of bring together kind of leadership skills and that kind of development as well as my clinical skills. After being successful in getting one of the approved clinician trainee posts, I then moved to the acute adult inpatient mental health wards because it was felt that that kind of environment then was there to help kind of work closely with approved clinicians, responsible clinicians as part of developing my portfolio. And as I mentioned, I did work with a psychologist who went through the approval process early on when I started working on the Secure Service, and that was a real insight into the opportunities, and then seeing him take on a caseload and how that looked actually by being from a different background than a psychiatrist, which traditionally it has been, and it really opened my eyes to how true MDT working could be by having that different profession within that more senior role. I've always been a real advocate for us as occupational therapists to kind of really develop and go into different roles and really show the unique skill set that we can bring. So when the opportunities came up to start the training, I thought this was really, really exciting for us and to show sort of within the trust and wider how care could look by having an occupational therapist in that role. Similar to Domve and Sarah, it's another way around career progression whilst remaining clinical, similar in Cornwall Trust, kind of those higher banding positions you are looking at operational management, but if keeping that clinical feel, it's a really nice opportunity for that. And kind of breaking down a bit of that traditional medical model as well, I think is really a real positive that we can bring. So that kind of led to me applying. Thank you.
So just a slide thinking about some of the positives, some of the challenges around the role. I think similar to what Harriet has just touched on in terms of one of the positives, this really gave us an opportunity to think about a different approach in terms of how we approach the service users' care and treatment, and also how that offers a better patient experience, but also a better carer experience. So working with somebody who is, less medically model focused, but thinking more about, rehabilitation, enablement, empowerment, and all those things that we do best as OTs, all that skill set that we have to offer. It definitely helps improve the patient choice agenda. So, service users then have a choice and a range of multi-professionals that they could potentially choose from in terms of that person who could take responsibility for their care. It gave us, as Harriet and Sarah have both said, that senior clinical leadership profile in the trust and within the MDT, thinking about consultant OT roles, which for a long time has been really challenging for us as a professional group. We don't have many consultant OT roles, but we've had, colleagues in, other multi-professional roles who very readily have opportunities to step into consultant type roles. So that was exciting in terms of career development, workforce development, and so on. And then the collaborative MDT working, the opportunity that brings for us as OTs to lead a multidisciplinary team, to shape the conversations that happen with regards to a service user's recovery and time of detention, and also really challenging the amount of time that somebody might be detained. I think, anecdotal evidence suggests that multi-professional ACs, the time that a service user spends detained under the Mental Health Act is generally less. So for me, it's really about balancing the risk and how I use the Mental Health Act, but also, being able to discharge somebody at the right time. So having that authority to do that was exciting as well. As I've said about the OT profile, it's raised that. It's very empowering, I think, for us as OTs, but also as the multidisciplinary team. It's exciting. It's exciting for them at times to be led by somebody who's not, in a traditional medical role. And I think lastly, as I've touched on already, in terms of that, the carer experience, I remember the first family I worked with, they said to me, I find this all very exciting, that you're a responsible clinician and you're not a doctor. And, the innovation around it all was really exciting for carers. So there was a very positive reception in terms of the role that I played with their son. In terms of some of the challenges, the role isn't without its challenges. And that is why, one of the core competencies is around leadership. You need to be able to act autonomously. You need to be able to work interprofessionally and with the multidisciplinary team, and really establish that role within the MDT, within the service, within the directorate that you're working. And I suppose helping people feel that you're not challenging their role. So, for example, working alongside consultant psychiatrists, we're not replacing consultant psychiatrists, but we're taking a small part of their role, and we're taking on those roles and responsibilities, which then allows other professionals to focus on other complexities and parts of their role. So it's not in competition. It's really about how we complement each other. But I think that does take some time. It takes some education. It's definitely getting better, but it can pose a challenge at times. Also thinking about those, I think just linking in with that, thinking about mutually supportive relationships. So like I, spoke about earlier, in terms of, I can't prescribe the medication for my service user. So I need to work alongside a prescriber. That could be a nurse prescriber, it could be consultant psychiatrist or a junior doctor. But having those mutually supportive relationships in terms of understanding everybody's skill set, respecting that, and really working together in terms of what what's best for the service user is important, but also those roles need to be established. And then others understanding the role, and that is still something, you know, I'm working on. I think it's often easy for care coordinators to revert back to the consultant psychiatrist in the team when there's an issue with regards to their service user, rather than thinking, oh, right, the responsible clinician is Donvey. I need to go to Donvey, not to the consultant psychiatrist. So just, you know, gentle education around that. I think it's got much better in terms of tribunals. In the beginning, it was very much, oh, so you're not a doctor, but you're the service user's RC. So just again, understanding that role. Yes, I'm not a doctor, but I do have that authority under the Mental Health Act, and I have overall responsibility, and I make the decisions around that detention, discharge, and so on. So hopefully that addresses some of the positives and some of the areas we're still working on. Thank you. Next slide, please.
We just had a little think about advice or top tips we'd give for others interested in the role. I won't go into too much detail because I'm conscious of time, but the real key points that we thought were really important for people thinking about applying for a training post is around having that real significant experience within mental health and or learning disability services, and working with ACs and RCs to really understand the role, having that real understanding of what the training will be, and also what the role will look like sort of when you are approved. That understanding we felt is really key. Experience in a leadership role as well, we thought was really important. You will then be kind of leading on a patient's care, leading an MDT, so having that strong voice and being able to make difficult decisions at times whilst maintaining that good MDT working relationships, we felt was really important. You also need to have support from your management and your organisation to go forward within a trainee post. So actually, if it is something you're interested in, already beginning to kind of bring it up in supervisions and appraisals, just so that you can begin to think about specific training that might be helpful, and really kind of get ready then towards you know, applying for the post and working on your portfolio. Have the next slide, please, Jen. Thank you. We also felt it would be really important to actually speak to other multi-professional approved clinicians. That, you know, we have this great little reference group that we've been working with our COT. So that's a really exciting way to kind of meet with other people, and also other impacts from other backgrounds, psychologists, social workers, mental health nurses, to really understand how it sort of looks in practice. And finally, like I've mentioned, lots of experience, lots of kind of training. We felt tribunals was really important to be attending, or writing reports, or, you know, really getting that knowledge within that kind of legal framework, we thought was really, really helpful for that. And finally, be interested in learning and preparing to return to education. It is, you know, recommended about completing some sort of further education within mental health law. So just acknowledging that it kind of is going back to education to really bolster your portfolio then in preparation to submit. Thank you.
So how can the Royal College of OTs support? The Royal College of Occupational Therapists lobbied for OTs to be included in the Mental Health Act 2007 changes, which has enabled occupational therapists, psychologists, social workers and mental health nurses to become approved clinicians. As we've already discussed, as previously it was only psychiatrists or medics that were eligible. RCOT now has a working group for developing information and support for occupational therapists interested in the role, and those training to be approved clinicians. There was an OT news article, which hopefully you've all seen, that came out in November 2022, and RCOT is developing a web page, which is coming soon, so we'll keep a lookout for that. And that brings us to the end of our presentation. I hope that it's been useful and interesting. We have our email addresses there if you'd like to contact us outside, and obviously we have the question answer panel at the end as well. So thank you all very much for listening.
Thank you massively to you, Donve and Sarah and Harriet. That was a really, really informative, clear and helpful presentation. I'm really, really grateful that you did that. I'm sure the audience are too. I'm sure the audience have got loads of questions, but because of time, if you can hold on to your questions and either put them in the chat bar, then I think we're going to move straight on to our next set of presenters who are from the approvals panels. So I'm just going to put myself on mute for a sec and stop sharing so my colleagues can take over the sharing. Okay, so can I invite our Alison Jill? Are you able to get hold of the slides okay?
So shall I do introductions while Alison is trying to get the slides up? So hello, thank you very much for inviting us here. My name is Jill Bell. I am a consultant forensic learning disability adolescent psychiatrist. I am an approved clinician and I've been the chair of the North of England's approval panel since 2015, I think. I have mentored approved clinicians and I have worked alongside responsible clinicians from professional backgrounds other than medicine. And we're quite a strong advocate of helping develop things. And we're very excited because I know part of the audience is one of the first OTs within the North of England who's hopefully along this pathway. So I'm looking forward to seeing their portfolio in due course. Together with me, I have Alison Mosley. Alison, can you introduce yourself?
Yes, I can indeed. I'm Alison Mosley. I'm the approvals manager of the North of England approvals panel. I'm just slipping over myself there. And I'm a social worker by background and have found the presentations so far really fascinating. I don't know if Meryl wants to just introduce herself as well.
Thank you, Alison. Good afternoon, everybody. Meryl Roberts, the approvals manager for the 7 health boards in Wales, of which Betsy Cadwaladr Health Board is the approving board for the approval of approved clinicians. And my background is for 20 odd years or so, I was a mental health app manager. It's very nice to be here today, and I've really enjoyed the presentation so far.
Thanks, Meryl. And again, the reason Alison and I are here to hopefully represent England, although we only cover a quarter of England. Meryl is here for Wales because the most important thing to remember is that if you are an approved clinician, you're an approved clinician either in England or in Wales, but you have to be approved by both areas. So it's not reciprocal. So the section 12, which is for doctors for detention, if you're approved in England, that is accepted in Wales. But again, to be an approved clinician, you either have to be approved by the Welsh panel or approved for Wales. For England, you have to be approved by one of the English panels. So it's an important thing to be mindful of, because again, the requirements for the approval are slightly different in the 2 jurisdictions. So it's important to be mindful of that. So I'm hoping Alison's going to share some slides shortly. We're going to skip over some of them because the ladies before us have I think detailed some stuff, but so it means that we can probably emphasize much more around the approval side of things and what the approval panels can offer and support you within your journey. For Scottish colleagues, yes, it is very different. And I'm not sure whether Scotland has adopted. I know that, yeah, they had talked to us, and we've certainly done a lot of, within my organisation, we had some of the first approved clinicians in the country. So the first psychology approved clinician I worked alongside and was a dear friend and colleague. And on our panel, we had the first nurse approved clinician. So I'm very disappointed, Donve, that we haven't had the first OT approved clinician that went to London. And I think the first social work approved clinician was the Southwest panel. So we can't have everything. So, but we have talked to other jurisdictions.
Sorry, Jill. Sorry to interrupt. Jen, could you please share the slides?
Brilliant. There we go. Next slide. So there are 4 different approval panels. So we are from the north of England, which goes, I think in the next slide we'll show you, but we go from Liverpool to Hull and up to the Scottish borders. There's the Midlands panel, there's the London panel, and there's the South of England panel. And then Meryl will talk about approval in Wales. But within those panels, we try to do things mostly the same, because it's a national recognition of status being an approved clinician. So if you're an approved clinician in the north of England, you'll be doing more or less the same job as in the south. However, there is slight variation in what the panel's like, because the panels are made up of your peers. So within the North of England approvals panel, we have a number of ACs from nursing and psychology backgrounds, as well as medical backgrounds. And so you're evaluated by your peers. And we know over a period of time what sort of things the panels feel helps demonstrate within their areas the 8 AC competencies that have already been talked about. Next slide. So again, just to remind people, and I'll just go over this, just to remember that the amendments to the 2007 Act enabled other professional groups to come through the portfolio route. Okay, so that's you guys, the nurses, social workers, psychologists, and doctors not on the specialist register. So again, just to remember that there are 5 very different professional backgrounds that we as panels have to create a level playing field for. So the idea is that we recognise that people have come along different journeys and come from different professional slants, but the idea is that you are showing those competencies and those are the comparators. One of the things that we're emphasising is that for medical candidates, that they have to have at least 7 years psychiatric experience, 4 at a higher level. And again, there is a consensus among the panels that we are looking at for something fairly similar from the other professional groups, so that it's not, you know, something that you would do straight out of your OT training. But again, delighted to see that there's OT students there, that really this should be in their heads right at the start, from when they start practice, about how am I going to gain this experience, and this is where I am heading to. Next slide, please. So at the moment, it's woeful. We have less than 1% of the AC workforce comes from a non-medical background. And we as panels, again, will still receive more portfolios from non-specialist registered doctors than the other professional groups. Okay, but it's beginning to even up. But as you can see, we're very proud in the north of England that we have the most people from other professional backgrounds, but there is a 0 in that OT column, which I really want us to fix as quickly as possible. As you can see, also Wales, given the relative size, is also a keen and enthusiastic supporter of approved clinicians from other backgrounds. Meryl, do you want to say anything in there?
Really, it's just to say that you mentioned the criteria on the earlier slide about medical applicants. Ours is exactly the same as your panel requirement. In Wales, for an occupational therapist to be considered eligible to apply, then our panel would seek that the occupational therapist is at least working to an NHS equivalent band 7, if not preferably a band 8. So I know that earlier there was some talk about consultant being in the job title, which isn't, as we know, it's not a requirement to be a consultant. You can be both a consultant as well as an occupational therapist, AC. So really that was just to say that that's the Wales eligibility requirement set by the one panel. So Jill's explained to you all that there are 4 region approved panels for England, and there is just the one in Wales, and because of the geographical spread, I cover all of the 7 health boards and the independent hospitals. So I don't know if that's helpful.
No, it is, Meryl, thanks. Could I have the next slide, please? So, I'm going to focus on the portfolio. That's what we look at. Prior to the pandemic, every portfolio that came to the panel was reviewed. The way we do it in the north of England is that the portfolios are reviewed in detail by an approved clinician from the same professional background as the candidate, and an approved clinician who's a doctor. Yeah, and that's because there's more of us around, and that we've obviously had a length and breadth of experience. And when we're looking at that portfolio, we are looking to see that the candidate has demonstrated the competencies. We have, so panel members would look at that in detail. They would share with the wider panel. We would agree whether something was above the bar, below the bar. And then I got to see every portfolio. Poor Alison gets to see every portfolio before it goes to panel, when it's usually a little bit less together and tidy. Certainly in the old days, things have improved greatly. And then I get to see them. I used to get to see them as a final quality check. Now that the panel, the way we do panel benchmarking sessions. We train up all our panel members to be able to review portfolios so that we have a consensus, and we're fairly content that if any panel member looked at a portfolio, that they would come to the same opinion. And again, that we've got that national consensus that if a portfolio was approved in the north of England, it would also be approved in London, the south of England, Wales, to a lesser extent, because obviously it's slightly different criteria. So that's what we do around that process. So we've seen lots of portfolios. We also instituted a bit of an exit questionnaire with applicants around what things that they found most value, and those are the things that we've tried to develop and we're going to emphasize here. So the first thing is that if you've not got the backing of your employing organization, you're going uphill in porridge. Okay, folks. All of the candidates, the portfolios that come through that have got the backing and support of their organisation are usually head and shoulders above everything else, because it just makes life much, much easier. You do need to be exposed to more than one approved clinician, RC mentor, because we all do things slightly differently. I'm sure I've got lots of bad habits. Alison's very good. She doesn't tell me too often what they are. But again, you know, I used to work in a clinical setting. Me and my fellow consultant, we work very differently. And again, our psychology approved clinician work very differently. And we got people to work across the three of us because they developed better skills as a consequence of that. Preparation of your evidence. So preparation of the evidence, there's first about learning how to do the job, and then there is the preparing the evidence to demonstrate that you can do the job. And I separate the two out because I think it's important to make that functional distinction, because that's why we're saying we want fairly contemporaneous evidence. It might have taken you 3 years to crack writing a really good tribunal report and giving evidence, but we really just want the end of that journey, not the whole length of it. But you do need to be realistic. This is a, you know, it is exciting, but it is hard work, and it does realistically take you a couple of years to gain that evidence. Okay, again, depends on where your starting point is. If you're a student OT, you know, it's not going to take you 2 years from now. But if you are an experienced clinician within mental health and disabilities, give yourself a break and recognize that it's that amount of work. And that's with being given time in your job plan to do so. Along with the approved clinician induction course, and remember, you have to do an approved clinician induction course. These are approved by the various panels, and that's different to any of the university courses that are out there. So those are two. And then the other thing is that we've got listed down all the various things that you need to apply, but we've put that in other things. Okay. Right, next slide, please. Right. The thing to remember is why did they make responsible clinicians? So it used to be the RMO, the doctor. Okay, there are 4 key major decisions for a responsible clinician. Okay, as an approved, you can only be a responsible clinician if you are an approved clinician. Yeah, and those are the 4 areas of treatment, discharge, renewal, and everything to do with CTOs. These are the things where things go wrong. Okay, so these are really important, and what you're demonstrating is that you understand the legal frameworks that these areas operate in, and that you can provide that leadership. So I always say, as the RC, my job is to keep the team legal. Yeah, and I'm the person who knows most about the law to make sure that we're doing that and provide that leadership. Okay. Again, we've emphasised that it's not an academic exercise. There are a number of courses there. Health Education in England are helping develop those. Those are a really good way if you haven't been embedded in the mental health law side of things to get up to speed. But the work that they require you to produce is very different from the portfolio. So try not to get the two confused. Again, we've talked a lot to course providers to try and, again, help you get your heads around this. It's not an academic exercise. It is about the practical demonstration of the law. And one of the things we see sometimes from portfolios, somebody's obviously been on one of the university courses, because you can see they were at the lecture. They obviously just switched off at the crucial five minutes about the actual precision, about the practical implication. And as they say, we can teach the law, but what people do with it is not in our control. Next slide. Okay, these are the AAC competencies. They're there for you to read. It's useful to talk with your local approval panel that you are identifying that you're going to submit to, because they will help you think about what evidence you should submit to demonstrate these competencies. One of the things that we each of the panels will do, and Meryl will tell me what the situation is in Wales in a second, but we will put on workshops. We in the north of England put on workshops, what we call portfolio workshops, which are run by Alison, which help you think about how you put your portfolio together and how you demonstrate the competencies. We also in the north of England put on mentor workshops, because we said that you need to have an ACRC mentor. We also put those on. All you have to do is drop us an email, tell us you're interested, and we will let you know when those dates occur. But we're happy to do that. And those are to help you demonstrate the competencies in the portfolio. It is much easier for us if your portfolio is in decent shape when we see it. Meryl, what's the crack in Wales? Do you do workshops?
We commenced workshops at the end of last year, and we're currently getting dates together for 2023. So based on the expressions of interest and the attendance at the Wales AC induction training dates, we canvass how we seek to see how many medical attendees may not be included in the specialist register, which would have to apply via the portfolio route, and other and MPACs, and contact them and ask for a rough idea of when they're going to be planning to collate their portfolio. And so it's a fairly new thing in Wales, but they are in place. And the one and only event we held last year was very successful. We had 2 medics attend and 5 we had 3 psychologists and 2 nurses, so that was really heartening, very heartening. Can I just add there, please, quickly? You mentioned the England 8 AC competencies, and in Wales, ours are virtually the same. There are some subtle differences, and I'll just briefly talk about 2 notable differences. One, that the 9th, the extra competency in Wales is the values-based practice and the care and treatment planning, Wales Mental Health Measure 2010. So ours, you've got treatment and care planning, and we've got those headings. We also have one, care and treatment planning, and that's because of the Wales Mental Health Measure 2010. So there are the subtle differences, but broadly the same, but there are some differences.
Thanks, Meryl. Next slide. So again, the demonstrating the AC competence, as Alison's put here, it's not enough to evidence that you can perform your current job well at a senior level. It is about what is the purpose and criteria of a legal function, how is it applied and its procedure, and why now is it relevant for this patient. So there are things to absolutely understand around that bit about being a responsible clinician. The important thing is that being a responsible clinician doesn't stop you being a senior OT or a senior clinician from whatever background, and that you are a clinician first and foremost, and a responsible clinician is to, as I say, ensure that you'll just keep everybody lawful and legal. And the last slide, please. So the top tips. Ask an expert, ask again. One of the things that when you guys were developing this, my first question is there a national OT network? So for me, I would be really recommending that you guys who are in the process of developing your portfolios to become ACs, that you link up nationally from an OT perspective, so that you're picking out those things that are potentially either a particular challenge because of your professional background, or actually you realize it's not because I'm an OT, it's because of where I'm working and or the field I'm working in. So I think that's useful. I'm a real advocate for multi-professional active learning sets. So one of the strong things that have come out of any of the educational establishments is the setting up of an active learning set. And I think if they're multi-professional and if you include your SAS doctors, then you'll be able to articulate, is this a legal issue? Is it a clinical issue? Is it a professional issue? And it really does enhance your learning. So I'd really recommend that. Again, don't forget your Mental Health Act office. They are hugely knowledgeable. People like me, I'm on the phone to them all the time. So they're a huge resource, and they would much rather that you utilize them. Again, I worked in an adolescent medium secure unit, didn't do an awful lot of CTO. So I have a colleague who I call the CTO King, who is a nurse by background. But again, I'll recommend people to go there because, again, spending half a day with somebody who lives and breathes something really helps you crystallize within your head a particular either clinical issue or a legal issue. Alison's fond of saying, would you wear a shabby suit to an interview? Some of the portfolios, I've got one here. So this is not a shabby suit because it's out of its case, but that's the sort of amount of paperwork you're hoping to demonstrate, okay? It's pretty thick and meaty. That is one of the best portfolios I've seen in a very long time. And it was beautiful, absolutely beautiful. So whoever your favorite designer is or your favorite retailer is, it was them. So it was great. It was clear, it was concise, it was really good. So remember your portfolio, you'll be fed up to the back teeth with it by the time you submit it, folks. You really will. Put it to one side, leave it a few weeks, take it out, check that it is pressed, that it is neat, etc. Because that does, when we get the portfolios, we can tell the ones that people have given that extra time, and it makes it easier for us to go through. Less can definitely be more. The guy who put in 6 tribunal reports, and as the panel member said, demonstrated that he consistently put in 4 reports. Yeah, so wasn't very good. The submission must be your own work. Okay, folks. So those of us who work in inpatient settings know that updating of a report, when you're submitting something within a portfolio, it needs to be your own work. It needs to read as your own work. It comes through if it's not. Anonymization, we will reject anything that breaches patient confidentiality. Think about your colleagues, think about the tribunal staff, they shouldn't be named either. And you need to show your workings out. You need to demonstrate that it is your thinking. The other thing is, you're fed up with it, you've submitted it, and you want the answer tomorrow. It actually takes us about 3 months to process it. So you think you've spent 2 years collating it. It takes us about 3 months to actually check through it, make sure that there's no data breaches, that the content is there, and then to give people time alongside their day job. All the panel members are volunteers. They're not paid for being there to do it. So again, it's about doing them a favour. A lovely portfolio is a joy to read, and panel members absolutely adore doing that. Ones that are poorly put together become a chore, and it's ones that people take their time over. So, and I think that's us.
Thank you so much. A huge thanks to you, Jill, and to Alison and Meryl. That was incredibly informative, really, really helpful. As I said to after our other speakers, I'm sure people have got lots of questions, but because we've got so much to get through, I think we're going to move straight on to, and I'm afraid we're going to miss our 5-minute break. So I hope that's all right with everyone. But I just think going straight into the next presentation will flow really well from our occupational therapists to our approval panel to thinking about from the perspective of our educators and leaders. So if it's all right, I'm going to hand over to you now, Sarah and Tony.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. Hope you can hear me okay. My name's Sarah Carter. I work as a senior lecturer at the University of Derby, and I've been part of the reference group over the last few months for this role. And really my role within that group is to think about how, you know, occupational therapy students at a more grassroots level, how even clinicians that are new clinicians going into the workforce, you know, what can we do to skill you guys as students, as newly qualified OTs, for the future generation of the profession to create these future opportunities within this role. And so for students, we thought about looking at opportunities within placements. When you go out on your placement settings, or if you are a placement educator within a mental health setting where it might be appropriate, seeking those opportunities, just as Harriet described about looking at going to mental health tribunals if possible, or even shadowing somebody that's preparing for a tribunal. What kind of information needs to be collated? Shadowing people that are in the responsible clinician roles or the AC roles. Brilliant if it's an occupational therapist, although we're aware that that is extremely limited in number. So could we be looking at shadowing opportunities within the multidisciplinary team, you know, other colleagues that are doing it, so that yourself as an educator and students and the newly qualified OTs are getting those experiences, are being exposed to those experiences, those wider experiences than might what come naturally within an occupational therapy role. Also, you know, to encourage our students to be seeking those leadership positions and seeking more clinical expert, clinical consultant positions right from the get-go, you know, inspiring them at our career events, inspiring them at you know, your events within NHS trusts, within the workforce, whatever networking events, but that these posts exist and should exist if they don't exist within the workforce, so that we're connecting with that career pathway and ladder as well. Part of our job within higher education institutions as educators is liaising with a range of educators, thinking about those practice-based learning experiences. So actually maybe, you know, part of the role is to educate educators, and maybe students can do that as well. You know, you're hearing about this, if you're hearing about this through the curriculum, you can go into different areas of the workplace through your practice-based learning placement experiences and be educating educators or as newly qualified members of staff. Within the university, we've thought about how you could seek opportunities. Some universities have OT societies, for example. Could you ask somebody to come, if you are a student, ask to come and speak at your OT society? Or if you are a newly qualified OT, getting linked in as an alumni student back with your OT society to inspire this next generation of OTs that are coming forward. And the use of language, I think, is really important, both for students, for myself as educators and educators in higher education institutions, but also as all OTs working in that workforce, using the terminology that is correct, that enhances promotion of that role, talking about these, approved clinician roles, understanding the language, so embedding it within the curriculum, using the terms responsible clinician, approved clinician. What Donve said in her first couple of slides about understanding that difference between what the AC role and what the advanced practice, advanced practice in clinical practice role, and understanding what those differences are, could be embedded within the curriculum, or could be discussed at a very early grassroots stage, so that becomes then inherent knowledge for our newly qualified OTs, and they're not on that same journey as discovery that we need to be going through now to educate the workforce and the multidisciplinary team, that it becomes a much more inherent process. Again, I've already touched upon educating practice educators in our liaison, and also networking. What can newly qualified OTs do? They can network with other Band 5, other Band 6 OTs to be stimulating this conversation. Within higher education institutions, we could also be looking at aligning our learning outcomes for our modules or for our practice placements, so that it incorporates more of the opportunities that these roles bring. And again, with that, maybe thinking about extending and expanding placements. We are looking continually about role emerging placements, and maybe the AC role can provide opportunities in that for expanding placements. So I think it's really exciting, as somebody that works in higher education, the opportunities that this creates for our future workforce of occupational therapists, to be going in there really skilled up, much more about the role and what it can give to service users and to the multidisciplinary team. But I'm going to hand over to my colleague Tony, who's going to look at the next part of our future opportunities.
Thank you, Sarah. I don't know if my camera is working. It seems to have turned off. Oh well, I don't know what's happened to that. Hi, I'm Tony King. I'm a consultant occupational therapist in Solent NHS Trust, which is Portsmouth. And I put some links in the chat to a report which I'm going to refer to as I go through this bit, which is what we can do as leads and what RCOT can do to support these roles. So in the report that I did, it was consistently identified this gap between health, local authority and education, and that we need a whole place approach to looking at where there are gaps in our workforce. So as Sarah said, from pre-reg placements, but also through to secondments, shared training opportunities, and thinking about where some of our skilled and ripe for development staff might be in terms of our OTs in approved mental health practitioner AMP roles and BIA roles, best interest assessor roles, who have got those kind of skills that can be developed on. So having closer working between these three areas would really help to start meeting this gap. And I think AHP faculties and the ICB, the integrated care boards, are in a good place to do that. As workforce leads, we've got a responsibility to have a more strategic view to grow in this pipeline. So I've seen it in the chat already that, there's a ceiling effect for a number of our staff. In the Southeast, when I did the review, we only had 41 OTs at Band A and above across the whole of the Southeast region, and a tiny number of those would have clinical responsibilities. So we're trying to develop from a really small pool of staff into this area. So we need to have a really strategic view about how we're going to grow these upper career opportunities for our future staff, and if we're lucky, some current staff too. And that we need to begin that early on. So I've put Band 6+, but the beginning needs to be earlier than that. The pathways need to be clear. The opportunities and expectations need to be mapped out for people. So creating again those shadowing opportunities, secondments, getting it into appraisals, helping people to use legislative framework to underpin their clinical reasoning, getting used to the language and the culture that is required, getting into those leadership spaces to be able to influence the MDT and to own that space, which there's been identified that there are some myths around OTs and that we're not ready for this kind of role in the Billings report, but we need to challenge that. And that's part of our role, is to educate and raise awareness within the wider service. Service users are entitled to responsible clinicians with the best expertise for their need, as Donve said, and we need to build around that. So finding out where your service gaps are and then building these roles into them. In my trust, we don't have the great need for OTs in AC roles because we have acute and PQ. Whereas if you've got rehab or eating disorder or learning disability areas, then of course you may have a service need. So be strategic about where your gap is. We've talked about language and changing culture. We at HEE, I think, need to be monitoring whether OTs and the multi-professional ACs have different needs in these roles. We are currently moving through the same training opportunities as others. Is that okay? Does that meet the need? And then for RCOT to think about, as you already are, thank you very much, creating some materials so that we can educate and raise expectations earlier. So 63% of the people in the work that I did said that limited awareness was the main barrier. We need to tackle myths that this is not in line with OT values. If you listen to Donve and the trainees there, you will hear this is very much in line with OT values. And a lot of senior people that are in positions to influence trained when these opportunities were not available. So let's make it easy for them to cascade this knowledge. RCOT, I really hope that you will look at evaluation and research and see if we have similar needs and similar barriers to those raised in the OATS reports that explored social work and psychology experience. Are our needs the same? What's the impact for service users? I hope that we'll get some really exciting research out of that. And please just continue to advocate for us and to support policy development. The HEE mandate for these roles runs out next year. Our pipeline hasn't been ready, so we may not have got the great opportunity that we're hoping for out of this current funding round. So I hope that you'll be able to support us to continue these opportunities. So that's it from Sarah and I. Thank you very much.
And thank you so much to both of you. In a way, we were so excited when we planned this event, and I would have loved to have given you more time because it feels like there's so much more. But just to say, I really enjoyed all of your points and agreed with your points, Tony. So thank you ever so much. So if it's okay, then we're going to move on to then the next part of it. I'm going to hand over to Awali. Awali, you got a bit of a difficult decision to make because we're running quite late. But I'm going to hand over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much. All right, everybody. So in terms of time, what we have now is like we're going to divide you all into breakout rooms. So you'll have 10 minutes, but also because you've heard lots of really useful information, we are aware that you might want breaks as well. So in a moment, Hannah will divide you all up into breakout rooms, but do take this time, you know, if you need to go and make a cup of tea, have a bit of a relief break to do that, and then we'll be back together at 1:35. So you've got 10 minutes. So in the Zoom chat, there's going to be a link to a reflective exercise that you can choose to take part in if you'd like to. It's really up to you, just to help you kind of process the learning so far. So it's for you to consider, you know, is my in terms of this role of approved clinician, do you feel that it's for you? And if you're a systems partner, is the working environment conducive and ready for the approved clinician training? If it's not, how can you make it so? Yeah, so do take the time just to kind of have a bit of pause, have a bit of a break, also time for personal reflection. And in the breakout rooms, you've got the option there to either have a break or engage in the breakout group with your fellow colleagues and have a bit of a discussion about your thoughts of what you've heard here today. So that's 10 minutes starting from now. Thank you, everybody.
Great. Well, however you used the past 10 minutes, I hope it was useful, whether you had a break or whether you had a chance to have a catch up in a bit more brief detail with some other people who are in the session today. So we're going to move straight now into our panel discussion. So I have had a quick look in the, pardon me, the Q&A part of the webinar. It doesn't look like there's actually any questions in there at all. So I'm going to invite you. I know people have put some questions in the chat bar, but if anyone has a question, if you can raise your hand, and I will have an attempt to see if anyone is raising their hand. So if anyone has a question for any of the speakers, or generally for the whole group, now is the time to make yourself known. Either raise your hand, I can't see any hands raised, or take yourself off mute and ask us your, oh, hello, Alison, you've got your hand up. Hello.
Somebody has to start, don't they, in terms of it. I don't know if it would be helpful to kind of briefly sort of say if there was any themes that had come out of the groups. I mean, I can briefly say our themes, if you will, if that would help. And
please do. We'd love to know. Yeah, go for it.
Okay.
Yeah, great idea.
So we had two main kind of speakers in terms of the group, one from Wales, one from London, and it seemed to be a similar kind of theme. These were managers who were speaking, who were saying, we have a workforce, we have a very capable workforce, and potentially, because we've got a workforce, we've got the resources to take that step to achieve AC approval. But the problem that we have is we don't have a pathway to actually achieve that within our organization. So having organizational kind of buy-in to this would be very helpful. Another theme was in relation to ultimately kind of pay levels as well. But the predominant one was that lack of an organizational support system. And that's about me, I think.
That's great, and it's an excellent point. And in fact, I think it was Jill put up a slide earlier on with a number of non-medical approved clinicians in England and Wales, and I don't know whether there is another piece of work that has looked at it by trust or health board. And I think, is it a fair comment to say that most trusts, mental health trusts in England, don't have any non-medical approved clinicians? The numbers are tiny, but what it does mean is that most people here are probably in an organisation that has no pathway. Jill, your hand is up. Please jump in.
Yeah, no, just to say that's true. Health Education England has provided some information to guide organisations. Again, most of the panels, and certainly in the north of England, we're more than happy to talk to trust boards to help them get their heads around it. And again, to be honest, to put them in touch with senior board members who've actually done this. So I used to work clinically in CNTW. CHUV hosts NEAP. You know, we've been quite at the forefront developing that. We've spoken before to East London Foundation Trust about how they should develop things. And again, I've talked to Hull, and I think I'm due to talk to Greater Manchester. So there are a number of ways to help trusts get their head around it. Again, key things such as that message, it's not to replace your psychiatrist, it's about to enhance your workforce. And it's actually, you know, for me, it's a biggie. If I can keep the likes of Julie as a very experienced OT within my multidisciplinary team and help her advance her career, it's a win-win. So there's lots of conversations, and sometimes you do need to have some tough conversations with the doctors around that. So yeah,
excellent, really. And I think one of the ways to go forward in areas where there isn't a pathway is to to find your friendly doctors and get them on board, but also do it as a group with the psychologists and the social workers and the nurses, rather than just trying to do it as a lone occupational therapist, because it is a multi-professional issue. Emma, I can see you've got your hand up. Please jump in.
Thank you. I have the joy of being in an organisation who is keen. The issue for me around pathway is the wider pathway. So we're also not great at RCAC, but we're also not great at advanced clinical practice either for OTs. And I'm really interested in how do we sort of grow the narrative around enhancing that clinical career pathway. So through advanced clinical practice into possibly AC and then RC, and how do we create, you know, there's the documents are there and the trusts might be willing, but yet we're not doing that yet. And that's the bit that I find really frustrating. Yeah, I don't know whether there's more we can do as a collective OT community to really think about that clinical pathway adequately. So yeah, it's not the organisation that's the barrier for me. It's the clarity of the clinical pathway development. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I'm hoping that when the hub of information, obviously it won't provide you a localized pathway, but when we get the hub of information up, because it's been written by occupational therapists for occupational therapists, whereas at the minute we have some literature. Tony is slightly hiding her light under a bushel, because she did an amazing piece of work in the organisation, I think, where you work, surveying and talking to occupational therapists, not just about the approved clinician role, but the best interest assessor role and the AMP, the approved mental health professional role. And generally people were saying there was appetite and they wanted to know more. So I'm hoping the information when it goes up on the hub will contribute towards that. What is the clinical pathway? How do we support people? Tony, your hand is up. Please jump in.
Yeah, just around that piece, Emma, it's so tricky, isn't it? I think the advanced practice faculties need to be really key in helping us. So you've got one in each region. We really need to pull on them to help with that whole advancing practice. But in the link that I put in the chat earlier, there's a paper called Spotlight on Advancing Practice, so separate from AC, but there's lots of policies and job descriptions in there that might help you. And then this bit, you know, advanced practice, consultant practice and approved clinicians, a bit like a Venn diagram. You don't have to be one to be the other. You should be able to have choice. And I think that's an argument for OT, because quite often they get put together. The British Psychological Society are really happy to work with all of the MPACs, all the different multi-professionals. And so they've got quite a lot of knowledge about how this has been smoothed out for social workers. Alison, you probably could speak better to this than I, and for psychologists. So there's a lot of learning, and I think RCOT can help with that, because there are now a growing number of people, so they've all got pathways. So I think it's a call to try and have a space to share that stuff, isn't it? We're on the tipping point. We're going to get there.
Thank you so much for that enthusiasm. And yeah, a shout out. Obviously, I'm always promoting the value of the Royal College of Occupational Therapists, but the British Psychological Society do have some great resources as well. And they're very, very happy to be in a multidisciplinary space. They were great allies when we got the legislation changed as well. So any other comments or thoughts or reflections or things you'd like to share with the group? I can't see any hands up, but
there's a question.
There's a question.
Question and answer tab. It says, is this a role that can be carried out alongside my current role as an OT? And that's by Julie Snowden. Has that been answered?
I think the simple answer is yes. I don't know whether anyone, I mean, you don't stop being an occupational therapist when you're an approved clinician or a responsible clinician. Alison, do you want to jump in?
Well, that's kind of the ethos, really, of the quite historic now new roles document, which was the first document that was given some kind of narrative to the ACRC role. And the reality is that being an AC and a responsible clinician when you're acting up, basically you bring to that role your underpinning skills as an OT. Psychiatrists bring to that role their underpinning skills as a psychiatrist, as a medic. psychologists, etc., social workers. So it is an approval role, but you remain an OT. And I think that's really important. And it is about what you bring as a profession to that role. And I know we have basically in our panel, we have nurses and we have psychologists. And we had one particular psychologist who worked on a PICU, working with very challenging individuals. Jill probably would have been better to speak to this particular point than myself. But when someone was asking her about treatment and medication, and she said, but I work on a PICU. I'm dealing with the management and consideration of basically behaviors, which fundamentally need to be dealt with in a therapeutic manner. I don't know, Jill, if you want to add anything. I've probably completely garbled that up in terms of the feedback on that. But it is very much about bringing, if you like, bringing to the party your skills as an OT. And that was the whole ethos of, I would say, the new roles model of when it was opened up. It was found that basically some patients will benefit from the input of OTs, whereas people who may be taking more kind of hardline medication may respond better to a more traditional medical model. But Jill, do you want to talk about the
it was
role?
Don't be pigeonholed, folks.
Yes.
Do not be pigeonholed. Everybody comes to the AC portfolio by a different clinical pathway, and certainly when we evaluate the portfolios, we evaluate them in their entirety. So we look at a holistic picture. And it's true, I can remember Amanda saying, well, I'm in a PICU, and I'm thinking, really? Because you'd be fiddling around with all the meds. And she said, it's all behaviour, Jill. I went, oh yeah, of course it is. And it is again about the don't feel that, you know, you're not a prescriber, you can't work in a particular area, because actually you can have an approved clinician in charge of the medication, but you're working collaboratively. And let's face it, folks, if you're working certainly in an inpatient setting, the level of complexity for service users, patients who are detained in our inpatient setting, they absolutely need and deserve good, strong multidisciplinary input. And again, don't sell yourself short on the skill set that you bring. I was talking to Julie in the breakout room, and she was saying very clearly that the skills that she has as a family therapist, as various other therapies that she's trained in, etc., she's the person that the family could relate to, because it wouldn't talk to anybody else. So, you know, you have your own independent skill set. We all know who work in multidisciplinary teams with difficult to engage client groups, that some member of the team may engage better with others, and it's about patient choice, you know, and don't undersell yourselves.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that. Alison, did
and
you have another comment? There's another Alison who's sitting there with a question.
Yes. Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Alison Bullock, do you want to jump in? Thank you for sitting there waiting. You got a comment or a question?
It's all right. It was just to add to that conversation, and I'd put it in the chat as well, Jen, in that we've been re-looking at our job descriptions for approved clinician, trainee approved clinician, and approved clinician. And a lot of the feedback we've had around it was, you know, we've got our expert clinicians who have grown into that and are really keen to stay involved in their clinical area, their clinical space. And say, but I don't want to move to a generic role. I don't care whether it's a band higher or a few bands higher. I don't want to be in a generic role. And we've had to be really clear and say, actually, these aren't generic roles. This is, you know, if you're a doctor, you work your way up and you become a consultant, etc. And, you know, the approved clinician role is an additional responsibility on top of being a doctor and doing what a doctor always would do. So actually, if you become an OT approved clinician, you would be an OT, do OT, deliver that therapy as you always would do, but you will take on the additional responsibilities of an approved clinician. And we've had to really think about that when we've been writing the job descriptions, to show that you are a core as an OT. You're not just an OT by professional, you are expected to be an OT delivering that therapy, and that it's an additional responsibility alongside that. And that's taken a little while for people to kind of get their heads around a little bit, really. So
thank you so much for sharing that experience with us. And I know that is a common theme and a common fear for people, that I will be less of an occupational therapist somehow, rather than us being more. It's self-actualizing as the best possible occupational therapists we can be. And that can involve being approved clinicians and occupational therapists. Okay, there's one question I'd really like to, we've just got about 2 minutes left before we have to finish the session, a few minutes left before we finish the session. I noticed that there are a couple of people in the chat bar who have asked, who are not NHS occupational therapists. So either they're local authority occupational therapists or they're private occupational therapists. And I suppose I'm looking mostly, now I'm already seeing a no from Jill, because the question is, can they be approved clinicians? So it sounds like you can't be an approved clinician. Is that right?
It doesn't preclude you, but how are you going to get the experience? That's the key thing. So you need to be supported by an organisation. You need to have to be exposed to those experiences. So I cannot see at the moment how, if you are primarily employed by the local authority or you're an independent practitioner, how you can do that. It's the same for doctors. So if we have a locum doctor who says, I want to be an approved clinician and here's my lovely portfolio, we go, that's great, but you actually have to be employed, and so your application needs to be supported by an organisation that provides mental health services. So that can be the independent sector. But if you're sitting with a local authority, I'm not quite sure how that would work. It doesn't preclude you, but it's, as it was answered in the chat, I'm not quite sure how you'll get the relevant exposures and experiences.
Okay, thank you ever so much for that, because we were having a bit of a debate about that. And thank you also to Alison, who's just spoken in the chat bar, because you're offering to share your process with us. If you were willing, we'd be very happy to put it on the hub as well, because it sounds like it would be really, really useful for people. Okay, well, if that's all right, we're going to draw the panel discussion to an end. I'm just going to share a couple more slides, if that's all right, and we will finish up the session. Okay, so to summarise, it's very difficult for me to summarise because we've covered so much information in the past 2 hours, but many thanks to all of our speakers. But hopefully you've learned much more about occupational therapists as approved clinicians, about what it's like to be a trainee occupational therapist, approved clinician. You've heard more about the competencies, the portfolio, the vital role and supportive role of those approval panels. And also we've had some chance to think about system preparation. So from an OT education point of view, supporting our new clinicians, and from an occupational therapy leadership point of view, how do we start to prepare the system? You may have seen that, some of you might have seen that we had created a SWOT tool for you to use to analyse what you've learnt, whether you're a clinician thinking about this, an educator or a leader. If you might not have had a chance to use the SWOT analysis tool, but it's a really excellent CPD tool. So you're going to get, after today's session, 2 different emails from us. The first one, probably quite close after the event, will be the slides. Some of you have been asking for the slides. Obviously, the slides have got lots of additional links and all the contact email addresses of the speakers. You'll also be sent the SWOT analysis template. You're going to be sent a link to give us some feedback about the event as well. When the information goes live on the RCOT website, that hub of information and further details about ongoing peer support, you'll be sent a subsequent email with all that information in as well. And in case you want to give us some feedback now, there is a QR code. There's a link there. We only asked 3 questions in terms of evaluation. Were the event aims met? How could we have improved the event? And do you have any unanswered questions about being an approved clinician? It's really important for us to understand what are the further questions that might come up for you after the session, and check we can answer those. In addition to the feedback form, we also produce a 5-minute reflection tool. That's based on the Rolf et al. Model of reflection. So it gets you to think about what was the learning event that you went to, what was it that was important that happened for you in the learning event, and what you might be doing next in terms of actions from today's event. So do have a look at the 5-minute reflection tool. It will be on the slides, the link when they come out. And I suppose the final thing to say from me is do stay in touch. You can get in touch with me by email. You can also contact me on Twitter. I hope this is an ongoing conversation. As I said, we've got some early innovators and adopters here, but we really want to grow this wave of occupational therapists moving into the approved clinician role. And we will only do that really together, drawing together. So stay in touch. And lastly, a massive thank you to all of our speakers. They all volunteered to share their time and their wisdom to us. Your genius will be kept in perpetuity on YouTube. And so I'm very, very grateful to all of you. So stay well, have a really nice rest of the day, and I hope to see or hear from you soon. Bye-bye.
Yes. Thank you very much. Bye now, everybody. And once again, the evaluation form is in the Zoom chat, so please do complete it if you can now. It's only 3 questions. Thank you so much, everybody. Bye-bye.